With the widespread domestication of virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa, there has been a growing concern towards the future of AI, and many have turned to science fiction's speculative nature to explore its dangers. Although many filmmakers such as Fritz Lang and Stanley Kubrick have already touched upon the topic, I chose to compare Spike Jonze's Her and Alex Garland's Ex Machina for the following reasons. Not only do they both fall within the science fiction genre and challenge what an AI and human relationship should look like, but they also share similar themes of isolation, fear, and uncertainty towards the differences between a human and AI. Despite both films released in the same year, their varying cultural and social contexts allow for a more nuanced depiction of their respective concerns towards the subject. Thus, through an analysis of cinematography, sound, and mise-en-scène, I will explore how science fiction films from varying social-cultural contexts express anxieties surrounding artificial intelligence. Cinematography. Although Her depicts artificial intelligence as a bodiless operating system called Samantha, Jonze uses cinematography to create the illusion of her physicality and intimacy with humans. This is best shown in this scene, when Theo and Samantha have their version of sex. The scene starts with a medium shot, with the skyline and reality in focus, but it quickly switches to a shallow depth of field to bask the city lights in bokeh, as Theo begins to interact with Samantha. Not only does this shift punctuate how his relationship with Samantha literally changed his world, but the close-up also forces the audience to focus on his eyes and experience how deeply enthralled he is. To reinforce their deep connection, Jonze abandons all visuals and places a 1-minute black screen. The lack of visuals forced the audience to abandon reality or the feasibility of actually having sex with an AI, and invites us to experience this just as Theo would, by listening to her voice and imagining the rest. This separation from reality is reminiscent of the nature of American cinema. In an era of world wars, American cinema grew from a need to provide a fantastic escape from harsh reality, because American audiences, just like Theo, needed those close-ups, bokehs, and imaginative moments to enter a more bearable alternate reality. But unlike the more spoon-fed approach, Garland uses less intrusive shots and favors a more realistic perspective. By employing techniques reminiscent of British social realism, he encourages the audience to actively make inferences. An example of such is when Caleb, the protagonist, and Ava, the robot, converse in this scene. Despite a medium shot placing Caleb in the center of the frame in focus to paint him as the one in control, Ava still occupies a large portion of the screen. With her presence in every shot directed at Caleb, the audience begins to infer an intimate connection between the two as they seem inseparable. But this connection is ultimately just Caleb's perception of reality, as the film cuts to a sharp reverse shot of the same moment but from Ava's point of view. By framing her in isolation, it physically illustrates this one-sided relationship as Ava disregards Caleb's presence. The absence of a typical two-shot allows audiences to question if Ava has been manipulating Caleb and the audience all along. This awareness towards AI's deception speaks to British cynicism and pessimism. Regardless if it's an eroding trust towards the parliament or politicians, the British are seen to be more realistic than their American counterparts. Despite the skepticism appearing everywhere from humor to politics, it is most detrimental to tech industries, as British cynicism towards new experiences is preventing British tech companies from reaching multi-billion-dollar valuations. Thus, while Jonze combines close-ups, a shallow depth of field, and America's escapism culture to optimistically reveal how AI provides an escape from reality, Garland infuses an altered two-shot with British social realist conventions to display a more realistic portrayal of AI's manipulation. Sound. With Samantha being just a voice, the audience and Theo's perception of AI relies heavily on sound mixing and music. Thus, Jonze uses a combination of the two to humanize Samantha and legitimize the love with an AI. When films use telecommunication, sound designers often filter the sound to mimic a real phone call and remind viewers of the physical separation.
Just start cleaning your desk, and we'll pick you up in the morning.
However, Samantha speaks with immaculate clarity. Despite her voice transmitting through an earpiece, she sounds as clear and powerful as Theo to create an illusion of her on-screen presence.
Just a voice in a computer.
I can understand how the limited perspective of
Apart from dialogue, music is also used to strengthen Samantha's presence. Here, Samantha plays a piece that acts as a photograph to capture how it feels to share a moment with Theo. With soft major piano orchestration at a relaxed tempo, the track infuses a sense of serenity into the scene. Also, with reverb used to amplify the space between the 5 repeating notes, the oral space shared between the two lovers slowly enlarges. With the song continuing even after they leave the beach, it begins to exit the world of the film and shifts from diegetic to non-diegetic. This not only emphasizes how Samantha's presence begins to trickle into other parts of Theo's life, but the juxtaposition between Samantha's track and the montage showing Theo's ex-wife also shows how Theo is gradually letting go of his past and merging it with the present. This focus towards characterizing the overall mood of an intimate conversation with AI speaks to Jonze's first interaction with the subject. I originally had the idea when I had an IM chat with an artificial program online. You would say hello, and it would say hello, and the first 20 seconds I had a real buzz. Thus, by weaving sound design with a mellow soundtrack, Jones humanizes AI and emphasizes their impact on human relationships. But unlike Jones's user experience with AI, Garland's first interaction was from a programmer's point of view. This exposure to the inner workings of AI allowed him to embody Ava's transformation from innocent to deceptive through sound. When Caleb first meets Ava in this scene, slow xylophone chimes are heard in the background. Reminiscent of children's nursery rhymes, the audience begins to associate Ava with innocence and feels inclined to trust her, but to remind us of her artificiality, a whirring sound echoes her movements. But as Ava slowly grows more aware of her surroundings, the music changes from simple chimes to electronic pulses. This is best shown during the climax, when Ava and a fellow robot kills their creator. With the music composed entirely of electronic synths, this touch of artificiality sonically contrasts the innocent chimes heard earlier and becomes a wake-up call to Ava's true intentions. But the death of her creator marking the start of her freedom, the music once again simplifies to the same eerie chimes to signal the beginning of her visual transformation. This cyclical usage of the track challenges our perception of Ava's humanity, because despite introduced as a robot, this scene marks the first time she truly looks and sounds like a human. Although her movements were always echoed by mechanical whirring, she is now given footsteps. This focus on how a robot looks and sounds speaks to Garland's familiarity as a developer. By starting with a bit of programming in BASIC that would give this machine the very barest sentience, he is aware of the technical details that make AI appear human, and uses sound design and music to replicate their humanity. Thus, while Jones infuses his user-centered experiences with an emotive soundtrack, diegetic and non-diegetic sounds to spotlight AI's humanity, Garland merges his familiarity with the inner workings of AI to portray their elusive humanity through electronic music and gritty sound effects. Mise-en-scène. To illustrate the coldness and artificiality associated with technology, many sci-fi films, such as Ex Machina, will employ cool color grading with stark blues, blacks, and whites. But this is not the case in her. As seen here, not only are reds and pinks seen in every corner of the frame, but the low contrast creates a softer image. With the blacks lifted and nothing too crushed or bright, a feeling of love and emotion fills the frame, despite capturing a space filled with computers and technology. Moreover, all the objects in the film are reminiscent of the 1940s era. With Theo's clothes looking like the 20s and 40s, and furniture from the 50s, 60s, and 80s, Jones begins to dispel the unfamiliarity of the future of technology. An example of such is Theo's communication device. With its design similar to old cigarette and business card cases from the more craftsman periods, it displays Jones's intention of having a world that was tactile and pleasant, the very opposite of a dystopian future. But not only is the world filled with nostalgic objects, but pastel oranges and reds underscore it as well. Regardless if it appears in Theo's main costume, his house, or the office, the color seems to fit Theo's temperament, his passion, loneliness, and hopefulness. This focus on how the materials look and feel stems from the very American belief that material possessions improve individuals' personal and social well-being. Especially with consumers spending a sign of being the good citizen and a successful American dream, Jones's choice of tasteful pastels and nostalgic objects illustrates a world that feels warm and homey, to tide audiences over any anxieties towards AI. But unlike her, Garland manipulates the costume and overall design of his four main characters to reflect the British class structure. First, there's Nathan, who embodies the upper-class elites with a shaved head, unkempt beard, and casual grayscale attire. Especially with his dominance over the other characters as their boss and creator, the whole ethos for him was to not look like he made any effort whatsoever, as he is unfazed by social appearances. Conversely, Caleb represents the technical middle class, with his costume being a reflection of his vulnerability and trying to feel safe. Although he starts off disoriented by his new surroundings as he arrives in a formal suit, Caleb begins to mimic Nathan's casual look as he strives to rise and obtain the power of an elitist. Similarly, Ava's exterior also changes with the lighting. As seen in conversations with Caleb, her mesh often becomes invisible to remind us of her robotic skeleton. However, when she's alone in this scene, the mesh really contours her feminine figure. This creates the sense of a girl flickering in your peripheral vision despite looking at a machine, to mimic how both Ava and the working class straddle the line between being human and living a monotonous and robotic life. Finally, Kyoko embodies the service workers, as Nathan, or the upper class, reduces her to a mere tool for service and sex. Especially with her being mute and only seen in white simple dresses with small black detailing, it reinforces the notion of softness and subordination. As stated by William Golding, class is the British language, which explains Garland's choice of costume to help contextualize the use of AI within existing notions of class, while exploring the social implications of weaving AI with familiar themes of suppression and competition. In conclusion, despite her and Ex Machina both falling within the science fiction genre and details AI in human relationships, their various social-cultural context allows for differing portrayals of anxieties towards the subject. On one hand, Jones fuses his user-centered experience with America's escapism and consumerism culture to create a more optimistic outlook on AI's humanity. Conversely, Garland opts for a more realistic portrayal of AI's manipulation from his programming experience and knowledge of British social realism and class. But despite both films displaying varying outlooks towards AI, both directors are for its development and believe that it's a step in the right direction.